I thought I'd let them share a little bit on sort of how they see what they do and the cultural life of Lincoln in general, and just some reflections. You can, whatever you've heard this morning kind of inspires anything, feel free. Let's go for maybe like 5 minutes apiece on kind of what your thing is, and then we'll have some general discussion on the cultural life of the community. So, let's just go right down the line. Randy, take it away.
Well, David, thank you for inspiring me. You built a bridge between what I was trying to think about and what I'll talk about with your story about the bridge in Peru. One of my favorite authors is Stephen Johnson, and he's written a book called Where Good Ideas Come From. He's given a TED Talk, and he talked about two island societies. There's not really a bridge involved here, but two island societies years ago that were separated from the mainland by tectonic shift or who knows what. One was close enough that they could hop in a dugout canoe and make it back to the mainland, maybe over a half a day's paddling or whatever. The other one was removed far enough, and I'm sorry I don't have the details of these two cultures, but was far enough that they could not get back to the mainland. And so over the centuries, the one society that was close enough to connect back to the mainland, developed along the same way as the mainland folks did, but slower. And the folks that, ended up on an island that was totally disconnected and they couldn't get back to the mainland, essentially stayed where they were when they moved across. And he tells that story because it talks about the value of exchanging ideas with other people, whether it be across a bridge in Peru or across a bridge in who knows where in our world, or paddling across an island or across the ocean or a body of water. And that's why I do TEDx, because the primary theme behind TED and TEDx is exchanging ideas. And so I think that's part of our culture that enriches and enhances us when we have the chance to sit and listen to someone else's idea, or to stand up and share our own idea. And as Nick mentioned, I'll just do a little commercial here. TEDxLincoln is next Friday. We have a dozen people, all of whom have a connection to Nebraska, sharing interesting stories. I believe one of them is on the panel later today, Tim Rinne, or Ryan?
Tim Rinne.
Rinne is talking about food from the Holly Hamlet, and so we still have a very few tickets available, so TEDxLincoln.com. There's my commercial, Pat.
I am Pat Leach, and I'm the director of Lincoln City Libraries. Right now, the libraries are engaged in a community engagement campaign that we're calling Libraries Are More Than Books, and I'll get to that in a moment. But one of the lines of thought that we've been following is that before there were books, there were libraries. There were libraries when there were scrolls, and where people wanted to collect those together and have a place where people got together to think about those ideas. Similarly, when there were clay tablets, the same thing happened, that people wanted to gather those things together, I think not so much because of the things, but because of the ideas, and that there was something about those that people wanted to get together and be together and share them. As we're thinking about public libraries into the future, we're thinking a lot more about people. And just in a really practical way, in public libraries, we're thinking a lot about creating spaces for what people do together. And in a library, that's usually related to one of the 3 L's, which would be literacy, learning, literature. And it means that we have spaces for tutoring, we have spaces for you just to get together and study with somebody, we have places where kids play together or in story times together. But the point is that there's something about the way we gather together to do that, and the way that in a city we create a space like that, that I think sometimes we take for granted and maybe don't give enough thought to what is behind that, that not only do we want to gather those things together, but we want to experience them together. I was reflecting on some of the things I've heard this morning, and one of our real areas of concern at the library is how do we work in the community so that children become readers and so that they become learners and so that they succeed in general at life. And a lot of what we do is think about creating great experiences with books and reading in settings that are fun and positive and where kids say to themselves, I can't wait to come back to this place. Now that looks a variety of ways. In my life, the way it looked is that one of my first experiences at the library that I remember, I would have been 4 or so, and the public library in Kearney, Nebraska, where I lived, had huge card catalogs that were taller than I was, and they had models of clipper ships. And my mom took us to a program with a clown who gave us, as we left, Jolly Rancher candies. It was my first time having a green apple Jolly Rancher. And I would like to say that I remember that experience because of the depth of the story and the puppet skill that was displayed, but I remember the Jolly Rancher. I'm not sure what that means in terms of my work today, except that every time we pull people together for what we think is going to be a great experience at the library, I often wonder, what kid is leaving thinking, God, this is a great piece of candy? And I'm not quite sure where that connects with everything, except to say that some of the things that we plan, that we expect to be deep and meaningful in a cultural way, often come down to something that's nothing like what we expected. And yet we kind of have to go with that. And I think that to ignore the fun that happens not because we brought in the most skilled storyteller in America, or because we chose the most quality book in America, but maybe because somebody saw somebody that they liked. Maybe they got to sit beside somebody who laughed a lot. Maybe they just sat next to somebody who kind of went, whoa, at the same time that they went, whoa. It's really hard to know about that, but there's something about gathering all that together that makes it more significant. And that's what we're thinking a lot about in terms of the future of libraries, is how do we continue creating spaces that are about people coming together. That could still be that people are coming together because they want to share books, but it could also be more like maker spaces. It could be that entrepreneurs are getting together. It could be that people working on a class are getting together. It could be that parents are getting out of the house together and bringing their kids to the library together. A related line of thought that is part of the libraries are more than books piece, and this is something that I have been introducing as an idea that I would love to discuss with you at some time. That is that in this country, literacy is pretty well taken for granted. And we are educated to become readers, and my hunch is most of you are readers. I'm not sure that we give enough thought to the number of times in our lives where we read something and say to ourselves afterwards, I see that differently, or I'm not going to look at that the same way again. Or I just spent 5 hours somewhere else sitting in my own living room. I'm just curious to know, just raise your hand even a little bit, if you have ever said any one of those things to yourself after you read something. It's a lot of impact. And I'm not sure what I intend to do with that line of thought, frankly, but I feel like in our country we don't think enough about the impact of the gift of literacy. And I'm giving a lot of thought to, is there something to be done about that? Is it just something that needs to be acknowledged so that we give it a little bit more thought, value it a little bit more, maybe celebrate it together more? But I think that there is a lot of power, a whole lot of power in that. And so when I spend at least a little time every day saying to people, libraries are more than books, I want us all to think that literacy is a lot more than knowing the words on the page. It's about being changed by those ideas. And so I'm thinking a lot about what could that be? What could that look like? Could there be a phrase for that? Could there be something about that so that we don't take it for granted and we really give it is power? And for me, thinking about libraries and culture, that kind of learning is what we need to pull together, because that's where its power, I think that's where its power becomes evident. So that's kind of my line of thought today, starting with a green Jolly Rancher And ending with, I hope we'll have some conversations about harnessing the power of all those ideas. Thank you.
I hadn't planned to talk about libraries, but I've got to throw in, there's, of course, a conversation going on about Lincoln needing a new library, which we do, and I have just one reason why we do is, back in the day, when I was growing up, there was one of the old Carnegie libraries downtown that Bennett Martin replaced with what I fear I must say is a fairly sterile kind of bus station environment. And in that library, you progressed from downstairs where there were kids' books, and then you got to go upstairs and get your adult library card. But eventually, you could climb this metal staircase and go up to the dome where there were constellations painted on the ceiling, and search through the older books that were up there, and you'd made it. It was magical. And restoring some of that magic in a new library would be just a wonderful, wonderful thing.
I agree.
And that sense of magic, I think, is what we try to do in theater. So I think the library instilled in me in some way a desire to make magic happen for people. And by magic, I mean, what's magic? It's turning lead into gold. We all know that one, alchemy, but it's transformation. And the transformational ability of art has been the center of my life. And does it transform people? How? I don't know. I don't think it's stuff you can't put your finger on, and that's the difficulty with art. Sometimes you can. Sometimes you can take a community project that gets everybody involved. The Lincoln's Bicycle Project. Did it produce great art? I don't know. Am I a little tired of looking at bicycles? Maybe I am a little bit. But it got everybody involved, and that was very clear. But a lot of what we do is not clear, just as in terms of this conference, I think happiness is very unclear. The one thing I know is happiness and well-being are not the same things. And I worked a lot with the plays of George Bernard Shaw. He wrote a great play called Heartbreak House, in which the characters learn to live without happiness, which I think he felt was very important. Not that they would never be happy, but that the idea that what they were trying to do was to pursue happiness, because that's Metterlink's bluebird, you know, you can't get hold of that. I know when I'm happy, and I know something I can do to be happy. I have a cat that showed up a couple of years ago on our compost pile. It was spread-eagled. We thought it was a dead raccoon. It was trying to get warm, and we eventually took the cat in, and we live beside a little pocket park on Ryan Street, and I can go for a walk, and the cat will follow me around the park, and I walk with the cat around the park and down the block, and I always, no matter what's gone wrong with the day, a profound feeling of happiness overtakes me when I walk with that cat. There's nothing I can do about that. It's nothing I pursued. It's a byproduct of something, and I don't know what it is. Sometimes I will see an old car and I'll be happy, and I can realize, gee, that looks like the Chevrolet that my dad had. And I'll be happy. For that moment, I'll be happy. But if I try to pursue happiness, I can't get hold of it. If I try to pursue well-being, I'm not going to be terribly successful. And if I try pursuing Nebraska nice, I don't know what that is. But I can pursue a goal, and I can get something out of that, and I can offer it to an audience, and hopefully they find something out of it, and we get something. And I don't know what that something is really, I know that if you have stage fright, you get the actor to pursue the action in the scene and to think about the action, and that overcomes a lot of the difficulties. I know that if in a drawing class that I teach at Hastings College about sequential art, people think they're going to take an art class, and I get them up and I have them tell stories for about 3 days so they can figure out a story they're going to tell and then do a little 5-page comic book. And once their objective is to tell the story, they forget that they can't draw. And all of a sudden they're not worried about producing am I doing a beautiful flower pot? No, I'm doing a useful flower pot. I'm drawing a flower pot because it has to be in this story. And all of a sudden they can do it because they're on their way to something else. They're on, and the things that you can do while you're on your way to achieving something, whether that be a bridge or a play or just walking your cat, I suppose. But it's something simple in life, I think, gets you through, and that a lot of culturally what we try to do is to get you through, get you from here to there. It's not necessarily always about big, huge project things. It's trying to get you. Culture helps us get through life. And I think we would be surprised if we said, let's take away culture from our life. I think there are people who say culture is a boondoggle. We can't spend money on it. Can't spend money on that. Can't spend the taxpayers' money. We're paying too much taxes as it is. We can't spend it on culture. But if we took away culture, what would we be taking away? It would take away, well, in spite of what we may think of it, a good deal of television would go. The stuff I listen to on the radio, we usually wake up to NPR, that'd go. You might not miss Shakespeare, but it would be gone. No community playhouse, no concerts, most of our music, whether even the music you didn't like, it wouldn't be there anymore. You know, if you could take it all away. And how much do those things help you get from here to there to there to there in your life? So I feel we need that. That's important to our community. We struggle with it here. I can't swear that the Shakespeare company I started will survive. We have trouble making those kind of things survive in Lincoln. I speak specifically of Lincoln. It's a problem for our city. We don't have a plan for that kind of performing arts to exist. We have a bit more of an idea of where we might be going with public art, perhaps, except that we have to. If you see a new sculpture in a roundabout, there will have to be a label under it saying "built with private money," to assure us that your tax money was not spent on it. I would, of course, like to see our tax money spent on some of these things that I think in the long run are remarkably important. Now, what are they going to do to us? They're going to upset. What does culture do? Well, it upsets some people. Does it make us happy? I don't think necessarily it does. I think it can make you profoundly disturbed. So I've stopped equating of I worry about whether I'm entertaining people, because entertaining to me means I'm holding your attention. And that's all it means to me. If I'm holding your attention with a play, I feel I'm doing something. Whether I'm making you happy or not, I'm not responsible for that. You know, you're responsible for that. And some people get by pretty darn well without ever saying, I've had a couple of relatives I don't know if the guy was ever happy. He seemed to do just fine. Somebody told me that I am now at the age where I have to subscribe to being one of the 3 C's. I can be coot, codger, or curmudgeon. And I'm trying my best to deal with curmudgeon. So you got to take that into account too. But I would say this about happiness, unhappiness, happiness, unhappiness. I've gone back to school. I'm getting an MFA in drawing and painting, and one of the reasons I wanted to do that is I don't have to raise any damn money to do that. I'm terrible. I sit in the audience and doodle all the time, and I don't have to go to an arts council, which I love the arts council, but I don't have to write a grant. I don't have to decide whether I'm going to go to the National Endowment. I can do this stuff on my own, and I needed that because there was a profound sense of unhappiness had settled over me. I just wasn't happy about what I was doing, and I needed to do something. And my take on unhappiness is if possible, you do something, you perform that action, and this seemed to be what I needed to do. I don't know that getting an MFA is going to make me happy, but I was moved by a sense of unhappiness. And I think a lot of times what moves us to very positive things is a sense of unhappiness about our condition or the condition of others, more than the sense that let's pursue those things that will make us happy, whatever the hell that means. So that's my take.
It seems like, well, last night my wife and I went to the community theater, and we connected with people there. We connected a little bit with the actors on stage, and that seems the connectedness seems to be a theme of what we're talking about here. I try to connect people with ideas. You try to connect people and with literacy and with information. And I just wonder if how that relates to happiness. I wonder if your pursuit of an MFA, you don't gain more from the interaction with others when you go onto the campus than the knowledge that you gain of how to do art.
Well, I must admit that having spent, I'm afraid, having spent a career in an art which is constant interaction, that what I enjoy is going into my studio and closing the door.
Really?
Yeah, and I think that is a kind of an interaction. I don't mean that cynically. I mean I think that there are times when we make certain assumptions, and I think we should not make assumptions. Interaction, community interaction is good. Well, is it? I think it is. I feel that it is. I subscribe to the idea that it is, but I think there's also, there is a time for all things, and there's a time for settling back and saying, what am I going to do? When am I going to? Maybe I will take this out to the community, but some things only happen that way. Not everything happens by this kind of thing. Sometimes it happens by a narrower focus. So I think both things are operable.
So are we allowed to maybe ask the researchers in the room, what is the connection between the kinds of things that you're talking about and what the research shows about well-being? Is there somebody in the room who could speak to that?
Event kinds of things that Bob was talking about, like will I be happy when I get my MFA? The research is pretty conclusive on that, that the boost you get from that sort of experience or from the raise or from some of these other things is something that occasionally lasts a few months, but that's it. In terms of lifetime feelings of well-being, these sorts of things don't really mean that much.
So when we're thinking of what she was asking in terms of having those experiences, but to paraphrase what you said a little bit, to crave the interaction with people and the connections, I mean, is that what research indicates is typical for people, or is that more an individual trait?
The research tends to be more with a more sort of individual, permanent relationship. How much marriage impacts, how much the death of a spouse impacts, and so on and so forth.
Because I do sense that all of us are talking about culture in a way that I'm thinking, Bob, of what you've done with Shakespeare, though, really is about creating a community event around that. Or the same way with TEDx, of creating a community event around that. That would be a lot different if we were all just at home viewing the video without having that group of people together.
Yeah, with Shakespeare, it's even considered important that the audience be able, we perform usually in an alley with, you would be sitting this side and the actors are in the middle and there are other people over there. And there's quite a bit of thought that Shakespeare works best if the audience can be watching each other as well as the performers, so that it becomes more of an event than and what's done that way in Shakespeare's day, so that you know, as you moved away from the audiences here and they're up there, that wasn't really what made Shakespeare work so well. So yes, a very strong community event.
That's why we still go to movies.
Mm-hmm.
I can get movies at home by myself, but I still want to go to a theater because of the feeling of, even if I don't see the people, you know, you hear sighs and so on and interacting. You have a question?
I have an observation on connectedness. I have a son who is a freshman at the university here, and his housing is in the suites, and he's an introvert, and he observed in the first few weeks that that's not very satisfactory, because there are 4 suite mates in a suite, and that he was expecting when he went to college that when he would come in, there'd be a commons area, there'd be lots of people involved, and he'd have to pass through that, and would be meeting people and so forth. But that's not true in the suites, because all the action happens in their particular suite, and he's not exposed to these other people, and he's envious of the people who are living in a less desirable residential situation of just a dorm room, because there's more that happens in the commons area, and you have to, even if you're not participating, you have to pass through.
And he's an introvert, he observed this.
Yeah.
But I would think that for an introvert, having a natural flow of people would be more important than for the person who's actively. I'm a very introverted person, so I wouldn't go out to seek the other people. I'd want them somehow to be in an environment that led me to. I used to do my comic books in the mill often, and at a point where I just needed to have people around me, and I would get to know people that I would never say hello to. Otherwise, I mean, I did in this instance, yeah.
I'm from China, and this is my 3rd month here, and I realized that on the streets in Lincoln, I can have eye contact with each other, those people I don't know. But in China, we even don't have any eye contact. We just walk in a high pace of our own. And when I came to Lincoln, I was feeling so warm and kindness, so kind of things makes me happy.
Bob, I just want to appreciate what you said about culture getting us through. It's so important, and it felt good to hear you say that. It just feeling the truth of that. It's gritty, you know. It's not all lofty. It's just very real.
Yeah, I think there is a community involvement. He mentioned he was at the community playhouse. I think one of the things I would like to see in Lincoln is more of a plan for performing arts. Just because it's a bit illusory. We sometimes the strongest performing arts communities in the nation, the arts are locally based. And you may have things that come through, but you have arts that are growing and thriving from within the community as well. And of course, that involves the community in an entirely different way and gives expression to the particular needs of this community. Republicans should love the idea, because it is a very local-based idea. It's easy for us to have the illusion that we've built an arena, which I like. I mean, I like being able to see those guys come through. I'm an old rock and roll fan, and, and they have a lot of old rock and rollers there, and see them while we all can still walk. But it's a national notion. Or a world notion. Lovely. The lead the same. That these things will come to us and they'll wash over us and then move on. And balancing that with things that are local seems critical to me in the cultural life of our country.
You mentioned the lead. They did something this year that I really enjoyed. It was in September, and they had 2 nights of Nebraska talent.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife and I went to one of those and really enjoyed that.
Yeah, and they've done a nice. These people are not unaware of it. They have the Johnny Carson Theater, and there's a various series that get done there. The problem being, again, just a local support and a local notion for it, because those are very expensive things to do unless something is sponsored by the. And I think sometimes people will feel that a show in the Carson is sponsored by the lead, but it's not. You go in and you pay a fairly hefty rent to go into the facility and use it as you do in the Haymarket Theater or really any other place in town. So that kind of, there is a certain amount of support that's just needed for local theater that wants to thrive. It's been trying really hard for the last 15 years, I think, with some the Angels Company and Tada and Flatwater Shakespeare. We're really trying to move forward. And I will say that other communities have been more successful with that. And I'd like to see that happen here. I'm not bitching Lincoln, just that started a Shakespeare festival at the same time as Riverside Theater in Iowa City, for instance, which they will complain about how poorly they're doing, but they've grown exponentially, and the city helped to build them a theater in the park, et cetera, whereas we've never been able to get that kind of support from the city itself. So we'd like to see that change in Lincoln. That would be a lovely thing if we could make that happen.
This is only tangentially related to what you said, but what you said reminded me too about something I think about a lot is how do we create situations where we're doing better storytelling generally, whether that's through drama or through the kinds of things that TEDx does. But one of the programs that our city library does every year is called One Book, One Lincoln, where basically we choose one book that the whole city reads. And it's interesting in that what you mentioned was sort of the grittiness or toughness of what some of this is about. It's not necessarily looks nice, but it has a real power for all of us in terms of what's next. And I have had quite a few conversations with people who wish that we would have books that were a little bit happier or lighter, but the truth is the books that we choose tend to have things to discuss, and that usually means a basic conflict that is deep and meaningful. And it's led me to reflect a little bit today, too, on one of my favorite parts about being college age is I remember when I finally got to stay in the kitchen when the real dirt was dished on my family's stories. I had no idea what people had gone through. I mean, that there was terrible things happened, wonderful things happened, but until I had heard the rest of the story, it didn't really make so much sense to me. And once I got to hear it all, it gave me a whole new way of looking at things. And I think a lot about how do we use storytelling and how do we use these kinds of experiences, not to sugarcoat, to use a phrase that was used earlier, but to say, you know, there's some deep meaning here that if we share it will help us all be strong and figure out how do we move ahead no matter what it is. So I think a lot about that grittiness piece and kind of the dark underside that's kind of exciting, frankly, and that kind of puts everything else in a better perspective.